Hey, I'm Stephanie, and it's time for another head-to-head, or in this case, cheek-to-cheek makeup comparison. It's my battle of the blushes, and it's all part of my Panning for Gold series where I take products from my makeup collection that have similar claims and I pit them in head-to-head comparisons against each other to see which ones are the true ultimate gold nuggets of my collection. But this quest for gold is high stakes because my aim is to declutter anything that isn't a gold nugget. If you'd like more information about the project, I'll be sure to link the playlist in the show notes, but I think you have all the info you need to just jump right in. I'm testing a full face of makeup at any given time, but I come back to report anytime I found a gold nugget, which is why I'm here today, because I was testing a barrage of blushes, and there are definitely some gold nuggets in here. I was testing 4 palettes, 2 cream palettes against each other, and 2 powder palettes. And as always, I've left timestamps for you so you can simply jump to whatever is the most fun for you. Let's start with the cream blush palettes. I was testing the blushes from this Makeup Forever blush and foundation palette against the blushes in this e.l.f. Active Lip and Cheek palette. And I initially thought that this decision was going to be very easy to make, which one was going to be my favorite, based simply on the colors, because this e.l.f. palette has more colors that are simply earthier, and that's kind of what I gravitate to more on a day-to-day basis. And when I take a closer look at the Makeup Forever palette, the colors are just brighter, and that's not what I personally tend to gravitate to. But this comparison turned out to be a lot more difficult than I initially thought. Aside from the difference in the color stories of these palettes, there's also a major difference in the consistency of the formula. The e.l.f. palette is a beefier, stiffer formula that's immediately more pigmented. Very easy to blend out, but can give you much more color payoff with one application. It can be built up, but I never really found the need to because the pigmentation was enough for me. What I also like about this formula is that it somehow magically works on the cheeks and the lips. I know a lot of products on the market claim to work for both, but I find that they usually either work well for one or the other. But this actually looks just as good on the lips as it does on the cheeks, which is a huge plus. And that was not the case with this palette. This palette looked gorgeous on the cheeks, but it was really just a fail for me on the lips. It always just, the color or the pigment would kind of get stuck in the lines of my lips, and it looked kind of patchy, and it would sit on the surface of my lips. It was just kind of a disaster. On the cheeks, however, this formula really shined. And part of that is because it's a gel formula, so it can go on really thinly. And that meant that the pigmentation isn't nearly as intimidating as it might seem upon initial viewing of the colors. The good thing about it is that even though you can get a super sheer application of any of these colors, it's also really easy to build up and it doesn't look heavy on the skin. The problem with this palette is that it doesn't completely set down. It does remain tacky on the face. It's not as bad as some palettes I've tried, but it's definitely the sort of thing I would need to set with a powder, which for me isn't a problem because I always set my creams with powders. The question is, are either of these a gold nugget? And the answer is, both of them are, but for very different reasons. I feel like these are like different art supplies. These remind me more of maybe oil paints, whereas these remind me more of watercolors. And the fact that these vivid colors can be used as a watercolor painting to give me a very kind of sheared out, washed out color is great. And I think it's the perfect pairing for someone like me who tends to be a little bit shy when it comes to color, but this is a really easy way for me to use it. This palette, on the other hand, is just one of those solid, everyday sort of products, and it's literally the sort of thing I could throw in my bag and go. And it's a shame that it's been discontinued, but I figure, you know what? I'm just going to enjoy it while I have it because it's great. So now that we know that I'm keeping both of my cream blush palettes, let's talk about the powder palettes I was comparing. It was this Sephora brand Winter Flush palette against this Zoeva Pink Spectrum palette. Now, I think this was limited edition. I'm not sure you can get this anymore. And this Zoeva palette, I'm not sure, can you even get Zoeva in North America? I mean, it's a German brand, so I can get it here, but I'm not sure if I could find this if I looked for it in the US. So instead of talking about the specific products themselves today, I'm going to be talking more about my thought process behind whether I want to keep or declutter them. Because whenever I'm watching makeup declutters, that's the most interesting part for me. I like to hear people's thought processes. So that's what we'll talk about today. So let's take a closer look at these palettes. The one from Sephora is a little bit smaller and more compact than the one from Zoeva, so points for Sephora. The Winter Flush palette has a pink, a berry, a nude, and a terracotta shade, whereas the Zoeva palette only has pinks. So point for Sephora. And this Winter Flush palette also has a matte and a shimmer for every single blush, whereas the Zoeva palette only has one finish per blush. So point for Sephora. At this point, it is now 3-0 in favor of Sephora because this one is just more flexible, offers more options, easier to travel with. So the choice is obvious. Or is it? Because I not only have the Zoeva Pink Spectrum palette, when my colleague was refreshing her kit, she decluttered all three to me. So I not only got the Pink Spectrum palette, but I was also given the Nude Spectrum and the Coral Spectrum palette. So here's what I'm going to do. I am not a real fan of the shimmers in these palettes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the matte shades of the blushes from each of these palettes that are most unique to my collection color-wise, and then I will only keep those unique matte shades. So I will just pick 4 shades. So I will keep essentially one Zoeva palette, like a Franken Zoeva palette, and one Sephora blush palette, and I will declutter the other 2. So even though I didn't declutter half of what I was testing, I will declutter half of these blush palettes. Now that we know which gold nuggets I'll be keeping, it's time to talk about what I will be testing next. So when it comes to my cream blushes, I think I'm now at the point where every single cream blush that I have is one that I absolutely love, and I can definitely see myself panning. So I don't necessarily feel the need to test any of those in a head-to-head competition. I feel like that part of my collection is already pretty curated, but I do have a couple of products that I have been using as cream blushes, even though that's not what they're marketed as. And so I thought I would test 2 of those things out against each other, and that is these 2 things. This is actually a depotted lipstick. It's my Charlotte Tilbury Pillow Talk lipstick, to be exact. I had used it up to the point where the nubbin was so tiny that I couldn't even get any more color onto my lips from the bullet. And so what I did was I took a depotting tool and I dug this whole entire pan's worth of lipstick out of the rest of that bullet. So I just thought, well, why not try it as a cream blush? So that's what I'm doing. And I will be testing it against this, which is the Kylie Jenner Velvet Liquid Lipstick. And I know that these 2 things look very different color-wise when I just hold them up next to each other, but once they're blended out on the face, they do look quite similar. And so I'm going to see if it's worth keeping one or both of these. As for powder blushes, I thought I would take my Cover FX Monochromatic Blush Duo and compare this to 2 different blushes. Because this blush has 2 different finishes, we have a matte side and a shimmer side. So I thought I would compare it to matte and shimmer blushes that I have that are singles in my collection. So I will be comparing the matte shade in this to this Physicians Formula Butter Blush in the shade Vintage Rouge. So those 2 will be pit against each other. And I will be comparing the shimmer formula in here to this Becca Shimmering Skin Perfector Luminous Blush in the shade Camellia. And I'll see which one of those works better. So I'm really looking forward to this, but I am feeling like it's a whole lot of pink. And especially when I look at the eyeshadow palettes that I'm also have currently rolled in, I feel like I might just start to look like a bottle of Pepto-Bismol by the end of it. Or I might discover that pink is actually my jam. We'll see. If you'd like to see the results of all of these pinks or any of the other face of makeup that I'm currently testing, make sure you give this video a thumbs up and subscribe. And I always love to hear from you in the comments, so I hope you'll say hi. But even if you don't, I hope you have a wonderful week and that we can all remember that even stumbling can be a form of moving forward. So let's stumble in style.